does work. Wow. Welcome to Tucson. Thank you all so much for coming. It's wonderful to have you here. My name is Todd Rockoff. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the president and CEO of the Tucson J. The Tucson J acknowledges that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Arizona, the Hohokam people past, and the Odom people past and future. With condemn for the genocide and silencing of indigenous peoples, the Tucson J holds gratitude for the Tohono O'odham Nation, land on which we dwell. Here we are, ready and prepared to acknowledge the sovereignty of the land as we are commanded for the sake of unification. I have a lot of thank yous for tonight, but I'm going to save them until dinner because we have a lot to do this afternoon. As we begin, I want to do a couple of housekeeping announcements. On the back of your name tag, there is a QR code. If you use the QR code, you will unlock the mystery of the entire conference. You will be able to find the schedule, the map, the rooms, everything that you need. So please make sure that you take a look at that throughout. We also encourage you to be present and to be here in all of the sessions. And if you are so inclined at a point where you take a picture or want to post something, please use the hashtag JProConTucson so we can all share amongst each other. After this session, we will be breaking into 4 groups. On the back of your name tag, this part of your name tag, you have a dot. The green dot will go to the Javelina room. The yellow dot will go to the Saguaro room, blue dot to Quail, and red dot to Coyote. 3 of those rooms you're actually sitting in right now. Only the Saguaro room are you going to take a little bit of a hike. Here's your quiz. If you forget what I said, what are you going to do to find the answer? QR code. See, it's a good class already. There are maps to help you along the way, both on the QR code and around the building. Your name tags, this is serious. You can tell because I got quiet for a second. Your name tags are actually your admission to everything that we are doing. So please make sure that at every single thing that we do, that you are wearing your name tag because that is how you will get from point A to point B. The buses tonight, because we will not be together as a large group again, the buses tonight, you will have a break from about 5 until 6. At 6 o'clock, you need to be in the lobby. People that are in the lobby will get a ride to the JCC. People that are not, it's a long walk, or there's this thing called Uber. But I'd encourage you to be in the lobby to use the transportation that we are providing. Okay, here we go. So now, we are going to participate in a conversation. I want to introduce my colleagues up here, and then I'm actually going to sit down now. I know. So it is my pleasure to introduce my colleagues. You're not sitting in the order. Wendy Verba, who is the founder and principal of Belonging by Design, and happens to be a native of the wonderful city of Tucson, Arizona. Carly Coons, on my far left, stage right to all of you. Carly Coons is the Director of Education and Programming for the Blue Dove Foundation. On my far right, Rabbi Myriam Klotz, Senior Core Faculty Member of the Institute of Jewish Spirituality and Program Director. And immediately on my left, Jackie Zais, Interim CEO and current Chief of Staff for Gather, Inc. And I'd also like to introduce Jackie's colleague, Sarah Frederick, from Gather, Inc., who is here with us as well today. If you would like to know more about who these great folks are, you can use and read their bio.
And ask us.
And ask them. Even more important, ask them something. So we are here today to really talk about what it means to build a community of today with intention, and to use the JCC platform as a town square to put that community together. We believe that a community today should contain people that are in relationship with each other, people who feel a deep sense of belonging, people who listen deeply to one another and take care of themselves and one another. You're going to hear us in conversation with each other, and we will like you all to be in conversation with each other along the way. As we begin, I want to start by giving us all a common definition of terms. So Wendy, if you can tell us from your experience, what is it to belong?
Okay, is this on? Okay, good. Hi, everybody. We define belonging as, we all know it. We all intrinsically and instinctively know that feeling of belonging and not belonging. Every single one of us has been there in both cases. But we have a definition that we like to use that you can actually measure by asking people and also by observing their behavior. So belonging is feeling seen and visible at the very base level, and then feeling like I'm valued, like I matter, and I'm seen for what's unique and wonderful about me, and that I'm part of something bigger. I'm connected to other people around a shared purpose or a mission, and it's bigger than just me. And I feel ownership and responsibility and commitment to that group. So that's a really long definition, and it requires a lot of work to create that. It doesn't just happen by accident, we believe.
And Carly, can you describe to us what it is to take care of yourself and one another as we explore that?
Yeah, the Blue Dove we're always thinking about, we really focus on mental health. And so we're always thinking about what does that look like to take care of others? And the core of that is first taking care of ourselves. And so making sure that we as individuals have what we need to be successful and thrive and grow in order to make sure that the community that we are serving is able to thrive and grow in that same way. And making those adjustments along the way, it doesn't have to look one way or be one way, that we're caring for ourselves and for others, but knowing that it is a yes and we're taking care of ourselves and our community at the same time.
And Myriam, if you can describe what the intentionality behind listening would really mean.
Sure. So listening, it's along the lines of what we've been speaking about, but particularly with the focus on if I'm not present to myself, how can I be present with you? How can I create conscious connections in larger group spaces? So it's about cultivating the capacity to listen inside to ourselves, what we're feeling, thinking, sensing, what our spirit might be yearning for, or information that it may be wanting us to hear, and then bringing that same kind of presence directed out towards each other.
And Jackie, if you can talk about what relationship is, and maybe at the end how that might differ, and maybe you and Wendy can talk about where the differences may be between belonging and relationship.
I think, hi, my name's Jackie. I'm here. I'm nervous. I'm excited. Thank you for having me. What is relationship? That's a big word. And something I spend a lot of my time and energy thinking about, and I know that many of us have experienced it. And it is really just when we strip it all away, the deep connection that happens as we think about it between two people. We believe that meaning making happens in relationship between the experiences, the ideas that we bring when we bring our full selves and when we see someone's full self. How did that sound?
So this all sounds like things we can do. I'd like to really understand then, Wendy and Jackie, what is similar and what is different about the sense of belonging and the definition of relationship we just heard?
You want me to go first? So it's a conversation that I've been having with Jackie and her colleagues for years now, and I feel like they are complementary languages and very similar. So when you're in relationship, you certainly feel seen, and you feel you can, in the ways that they're teaching. I mean, they're really teaching a skill set that allows people to really see each other and be seen. And so what does that mean then when you turn an organization into a belonging culture? That's kind of where I'm stepping in, and colleagues that are doing the same work with the Varda Institute, which is where partners that we kind of develop this language together. So it's about creating the structures, the systems, a systemic approach in a group or an organization where this happens all the time. It doesn't depend on friendly people or outgoing people, or and building the relationships is an essential component of that. So I feel like there's almost like could be a Venn diagram or a way that we overlap, because you're also trying to build belonging and you're really focusing in on the relationship aspect.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up the word systemic, because that is so important. It's not just one person's job. It can happen roots to stem in an entire organization. And I think the way that Gather, I and we often think about it is there are many ways to approach community building, and oftentimes it's about serving the individual through serving the whole, right? What experience, program, event, how can we bring people together to help, have them grow, create that meaning? But in our relationship-based engagement methodology, which we'll dive into if you happen to be in a small group with us later, it's really how can we build community by the individual relationships and nodes. And so going from the individual to the broader community is how we often think about community building.
So we're not going to go up and down the line to each other. So we're going to try to have a conversation. But I'm going to start off by saying we in Tucson have been thinking about this idea of everyone belongs and some people join. And we want that to live as more than just a really great tagline, but an authentic feeling that the community has that they all have stake in the JCC. They all have a sense of belonging to the JCC. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you even have to come to the JCC. So talk to us a little bit about how that might come to pass.
Something that it is making me think about when I, just as a person, am connected to a community, whether they have a building or not, right? What is the value add for me as an individual? What is the thing that makes me know that I will be safe and included when I enter that space? And so I think part of it is how are we demonstrating our values in tangible ways for people to engage with? So for instance, as I'm thinking about mental health, if I am somebody who is struggling with mental health or I'm supporting somebody who's struggling with mental health, what is the J in my community doing to help me know what to do? What resources are they sharing? Are they including physically in the space on their website, so that if I just even Google, I happen to live in Denver, if I Google Denver JCC, am I seeing something there that has to do with mental health so I can take that knowledge and use it on my own? And then I know that the J that I'm engaging with is that safe space. So I think about how are we indicating to people what our values are and what really makes us a place where people can feel like they belong. Maybe they join, maybe they don't, but they know they belong.
I really want to uplift that, and I think that this concept of belonging is also not a destination that we reach, right? And especially living out our values. When we talk about belonging, we need to think about the diversity of our community and what they're bringing, right? Often in our Jewish spaces in Northern America, we are talking about white-presenting Ashkenazi Jewish community, and maybe straight, right? And how are we signaling our values of when we say everybody belongs, do we mean that? And that can't be a static promise. We have to be working towards that.
Well, I so want to respond to what you just said, but I want to say something else first, which is in terms of feeling like there's a belonging, I belong, whether or not I come and actively participate or what I choose to participate in. At the Institute of Jewish Spirituality, I think the focus is on whatever we do, it's cultivating mindfulness, that sense of presence I was talking about before. And that, we have these ideas of heteronormativity, ashka normativity, like who belongs. There are also ideas about what is spiritual practice. Like spiritual normativity has to look a certain way Jewishly. And what I think is really interesting about JCC spaces as inclusive, as belonging from a kind of spiritual or mindfulness perspective is to say, whatever a person does that they throw themselves into or think that they might, whether it be yoga or, you see one of my sort of biases, or whatever it may be, or going for a swim or taking the kids to whatever it is, that there's a sense that you can do it fully, and if you're fully in it, and you're with others in some adjacent way who are doing those things, becomes a kind of community of practice. And we know it at IJS, acronym because Jewish organization, IJS, that we tend to thrive if we're in communities of practice, if this kind of sense of belonging and inclusion is really is true, if there's a depth there that really has teeth to it.
I really wanted to talk about, along these lines, the tension in our Jewish world, in institutional world, between a transactional dynamic and I guess what you would call ownership or partnership. So you all have to keep your doors open, and that got really challenging in the last 3 years. You have to take in dues or find other ways of making revenue. We are used to serving people, Jewish people, their Judaism on a platter. We're used to giving them excellent programming and excellent experiences, and you're all really good at that. So what would it mean to change the mindset and really build that sense of ownership? Like, this is actually where I can initiate the things that are important to me. I'm responsible for creating this community. It's a totally different mindset, and it kind of redefines your jobs. And we're going to talk about that, I think, the whole weekend, each in our own ways and in your ways. And to some extent, you're all probably doing that, and to some extent, you could be doing it even better. And there is an element, when you get down to it, that I was thinking about when Jackie was talking about diversity, and it's the word power. And power is really important to kind of dissect and unpack and think about, like, who's making the decisions? How do we help people step up and have some agency to create the kind of communities that they want to create? They're not used to it, by the way, and they may not even want to. They're going to tell you, I just want to pay my dues and come and do my thing. And so it's an incremental change in the relationship to kind of retrain people to think that actually this is my community and I'm part of making it work.
That actually made me think of, I love that you brought in that word power. And at Gather, we often talk about this word fractal, not to make this like a vocab quiz. But the idea is, the small, the large is just replicas of the small. And so when we think about caring, belonging, relationships, are we, and I bet this probably resonates with your line of work, are we living those values internally the way we are living them externally? And I don't mean, and we've maybe worked at or been at some of these Jewish organizations that say, oh, we're all mishpacha, we're all family, right? What does it actually mean to be in a caring, connected community where we can show up every day to our jobs with dignity, we can bring our whole selves, sometimes we just are going through it, and we can also bring that authenticity and vulnerability to the people that we're working with it as well. We think a lot about what that modeling can look like.
I think a lot of that too is gaining some education around what does it look like to really support ourselves and each other, to support the people on your team, to support the people across your greater organization, whether that is some relational learning, how to have these conversations, whether it is really understanding what are the words that we're using, like how do we talk to each other, how do we understand and receive each other when we're talking, because I think in practice we're like, yeah, we support one another, we support each other, we're there, but I think it's like a little bit more nuanced, like you were talking about, and it's a little bit more effort. I come
A
from
lot more, maybe.
maybe a lot. I am a former camp assistant director in the JCC world, and I think when I think about summer camps, it's one of the things that I think camp is just so magical about is developing these relationships, because you've got this finite amount of time with the humans you're with. You're with the staff for your 10 weeks, whatever it might be. You're with the campers for 1 to 3 to 5 weeks, however long your camp is, right? So you only have so much time to make people feel safe, make people feel seen, make sure they're supported and included, and walking away feeling like they have a connection to Judaism, to each other, to the camp, whatever it might be. I think it's a little bit more daunting when it's like our lives, right? It's not finite. We don't have to just do it in 2 weeks. We have to keep doing it. It's a lot of work. And so sort of thinking about what are the things that allow us to have those relationships in meaningful ways, and how do we know when we need to like pause and take care of ourselves, and who do we turn to when we need to do that? Because self-care doesn't have to be a solo act. It can very much be a team effort. But that's a lot to sort of think through and start to identify that for yourselves.
So I'm caught, you had mentioned the word transactional, and we need some level of transaction to survive, but I think when that is how we approach a relationship, then we are not doing what Jackie suggested, which is bringing our, and Carly suggested, our authentic whole self, because we're always trying to get to the end. And I think that if we want to be the best versions of who we can be as a community building organization, we have to let some things happen. And transactions may happen if we do some of these things right. I think they happen with less frequency and less authenticity if we're always working our way towards them. So help me balance the scale of the need to have the quote-unquote transaction, but the desire to have the relationship and the belonging that we actually seek to stem the tide of legacy organizations don't matter on the landscape of Jewish life.
I just want to say this really comes up a lot in fundraising, and you all do, many of you are involved with fundraising. If you keep it purely transactional, you know, people will just walk to the next, they'll bring their money to the next thing. And I want to call out my friends in Palo Alto who have created a fundraising event where they don't actually raise money. So I don't know, Seth, where are you? But it's an event that builds relationship, that builds a sense of belonging. I don't know, they have, I don't know what the numbers are, but huge number of people who are there to lead or contribute to some aspect of this event. And that's where you build that sense of belonging. And then, you know, later you find out who wants to be part of it in a bigger way financially. It's a totally different way of thinking about an event. And so that's just a concrete example of removing the transactional nature of that experience so that people can feel authentically included. And authenticity is really important. And if people feel like they're just being, if you're building a relationship with them just to ask for money, they want no part of that. So it's development, and fundraising is just a really clear way to see how you can still involve people in giving without treating them like ATM.
Yeah, and I think picking up on this transactional point, and Todd, you were kind of talking towards this, but when we have, what we preach and talk about in our work all the time is, let's go into these conversations, however they may come up, and be totally present, right? Myriam can probably talk about this, but what does it look like to just have another human in front of you and want to learn more about them? Because when we have these, oh, I need someone, I need more people to come to this event, or I need more members, or right, when we have these other goals, we are steering conversations and interactions in that direction. Instead of being the blank slate of, right, we're explorers, we're figuring out what is important to people, and when we take that off the table, we can learn, hey, you'd actually hate this thing we're doing at the JCC next month. You should not come, right? Think of how much trust you build so that next month when you call them and you say, hey, after our conversation, I've been thinking about it, I think you'd really enjoy X, Y, and Z, right? Because when we're trying to focus on, and I'm not saying that we're always doing this, but sometimes it's in the back of our heads, right? We need more people, we need this, we need, right? Just the presence. Who are you? You're a human.
So it's so interesting. Just this morning, so I was flying out here from the East Coast, I was listening to a meditation talk, like a wisdom talk by a teacher that I listen to quite often, Tara Brach. Some of you may be familiar, seeing some heads nod. So her talk this week happens to be on listening and kind of mindful listening and presence, and which is the antithesis, if we're going to go binary about it, of transactional. And one of the points she made that really struck me is, she said, if one of the impediments to really listening to somebody and that kind of encounter that's not about, oh, you're the ATM and I'm good, right, is when we want something from somebody. When we have some desired outcome, then the bandwidth narrows, like we're being necessarily goal-oriented about the encounter. And so I think with what we're talking about, really when we get down to it, it's not about going, I think there could be time for this, and we do this at IJS, and some of you might do this at your JCC's retreat, to take a retreat time with staff or to offer programming where there's no other agenda except slow down and practice the art of showing up for and with each other for its own sake. But an interesting question that I think we live with in the workday week is, how can you bring that kind of awareness to a conversation? So like, I can still know that there's, I need to have a budget line filled if I'm going to run a program that will be meaningful. So it's not that we totally divest of that, but how to hold it mindfully, consciously, and sort of the self-awareness to go, oh, wait a minute, slow down. Yeah, there's a person here. And how can we enter that kind of field of relationship?
Yeah, and when you do, it does pay off in the long run because they feel truly brought in and truly seen, and you're able to bring them opportunities to contribute that are meaningful to them.
I think I have that. Oh, I'm so sorry. I have that question for my fellow panelists. I'd love to know, does getting somebody to sign up for an experience, someone becoming a member, do those moments have to be inherently transactional? I don't know. Maybe.
So I'm gonna say the end result is a transaction, but if we do it with our whole self, then the process leading up to the transaction is honest and true. And I think that's the mindset that we have to be okay if there's not a transaction, because that's the authenticity. And we don't say, well, if you're not going to join, or you're not going to sign up, or you're not going to do this, you're being voted off the island, right? And if you want to come back to the island, I need to see you show up with your checkbook. What we really want people to feel in an authentic way is whatever decision they make around the transaction is not their ticket in or out. Their ticket in or out is the sense of belonging that we create and the relationship that we maintain. And when we do those things well, opportunities will present themselves, and we don't have to force those opportunities. And it's not an easy thing to do. It might be easy to be up here talking about, but I think if we bring this practice into our work, we are going to find that the expansion of who feels a stake in the work that we do will expand exponentially.
A word that keeps coming up in some way, shape, or form is practice. And I think, especially as we're thinking about what does that look like to listen, how do we make transactional encounters relational? I think practicing is so important. We're not inherently just expert, active listeners. I think it's a skill set, and so what does that look like to practice both sharing stories but also receiving stories? Because if we are opening ourselves up to really hearing who people are, again, whether this is community members or our coworkers, how do we practice receiving a story in a way that's meaningful for the person who is sharing it? And I think sometimes we think so much about telling our story or being the storyteller that we don't often think about how do we hold that space for somebody when they're sharing, especially when there's not a transactional relationship, associated with it in the moment, right? We're not just saying, great, thank you, let's move on to the next piece. How do you keep that conversation going? And again, I think it's practice. I think really engaging in practice, creating spaces to test out, to role play those conversations so that the first time you're having them is not the first time you're actually doing it in real life. You're doing it ahead of time, the same way that you learned how to add in school before you had to go out in the real world and be able to add, right?
I think it's also about changing the way we measure success. And I know Gathered has done a huge, has moved the needle in our world on how you measure success. But some of it is talking to our funders about, like, we don't want to count butts in seats anymore, or tushies in seats, I guess. We want to count the quality of the relationships that are built, or what people do with those relationships after, or are they coming back? Are they coming back? Are they bringing other people? Are they stepping up and taking initiative? Those are the kinds of measurements that tell us something about how those people are going to stick in an organization, stick to each other, support each other, and ultimately, support your organization. Because I don't want to forget that that's not important, but by bringing people in that way and counting and holding ourselves accountable for different things than we're used to, it forces us to practice differently, and practice is key to all of this. Yeah.
And I think representation matters. Representation from leadership, however we define ourselves in our various ways, right? Like if we can try. And I agree, Todd, it's not easy. That's where it's practice, not perfect, and it's a lifelong practice. But to model that these other ways are really what we value, and we're going to try, and we're not going to always get it right, but we're going to keep coming back, and maybe even agreements, of how we're going to relate and have sort of shared expectations of what shared values might be. I think that, I know at IJS, when the leadership sort of shows that it's possible, representation, right, of that, then it seems to kind of go farther.
So we're going to take a little break in the action right now. If this has been action, what's about to happen will be the break. So what I'm going to invite you to do is we're going to ask you to get into pairs or groups of 3. You don't have to move around. You've all got people all around you. And what we want you to do is explore yourself and talk about with each other a time where you felt connected in a community and why, and maybe a time that you didn't feel as connected and why did that occur. And that might help us for the next couple of minutes really put some thought into our head about what we need to do with intention as we're building the community that we seek. So you've got about 5 minutes. Find your group. So if there is anybody who would be comfortable and would like to share a little bit of what they talked about themselves, and maybe not for the, we will come out and we'll take just a couple of comments, if anybody would like to. No, it's not a have to, it's a want to. One over there. Thank you very much.
I just want to say that I just started here this month, so thank you. But everybody in my office, which is the finance office, has been really welcoming to me. They've all included me in a lot, and they just made me feel really welcome. I have been at jobs where I haven't felt welcome, and this one, it's been really nice to find everybody that just gets along and is just really inclusive of everybody.
Anybody else? One more over there.
Basically, as far as like a sense of belonging goes, like if you have a product where you feel confident in that product, where you know that as soon as someone is a part of your J, that they will feel like they belong, like you don't have to sell it. Like all it is like showing them what you have to offer and then having that intrinsic value in yourself, like knowing like this is a gift that you can give to someone else. And then if they want to sign up, fantastic. If not, like that's okay, because you can still be a part of our swim lessons or our early childhood school. You don't have to belong to belong, sort of a thing. So yeah, that was it.
Wonderful, thank you.
We were talking about a specific example of the difference between transactional and actually having a sense of belonging, relationships. And we have a program at our JCCA in Albuquerque called Bagels and Jazz, which we do about every 4 to 6 weeks on a Sunday morning. And we have this cadre of folks that it's been growing and growing and growing. We started in the cafe, we had to move to the auditorium. Well, it turns out we have so many followers and so many people from the fitness department, a spin instructor, and students in his class. And one of that little group came up to Jill and I this past Sunday that we did it and said, how much is this costing? Are you making anything? Do you need any help? We'd love to see this go on. And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't have to ask for money. Somebody's offering it.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much. So we're going to go back to a definition of terms. We started by defining what we all do. I'd love to hear us talk about what is a community. We keep coming back to this idea of we want people to feel like they are in community. It might be helpful for us to kind of explore what that means to us.
Yeah, I often think what a community isn't more than I think about what a community is. And frankly, I think the term is overused, right? When we just say, this is inherently a community. Right? Is this group of people sitting in this room right now a community? I don't know, right? I don't know if people feel a sense of belonging yet. I don't know if they feel like they know the people here, some of the belonging principles that Wendy talked about in the beginning, right? So we need to make sure, and I think it's really important in the work that we do, is that when we say community, what do we mean by it? Does it mean that people are going to know each other, that when they walk into a room or a space, they get greeted? There are ways that we can define it that don't just say, well, we're a building and everybody who comes in the building is part of a community. And oftentimes it's a verb that we use to refer to just a large swath of people. Like we say our community, when we just mean the people that we happen to serve. But right, like we often also talk about how we don't think there's something called the Jewish community in experience, right? There are smaller micro communities. And so and also sometimes it's okay for, maybe the swim team is a community. Maybe the kids and the families who are in the Young Childhood Center are a community within your space. There doesn't actually always have to be this monolith.
It is overused, or it's used instead of the word population or demographic group, or and the way that I learned it from my teacher, Sarale Shadmi Wortman, who some of you know, is that it's also not a group of friends. It's a group of people in relationship who have a common purpose together of some sort. It happens that some friend groups become that because when I had my first baby 23 years ago, or maybe almost 24 years ago, I found other Jewish parents that we could be together with, celebrate holidays with, and we are still together, and we've raised our kids together. And that is a purpose. That is a purpose. It's given a meaning in our lives. It gives us comfort when we need, to get through hard things. And that's that sense of community, and it's more than just being a bunch of friends.
At IJS, we have had, since COVID, a daily mindfulness meditation sit that anybody could come to. You just go to the website, you register, you get a link on a daily basis, and from 12:30 to 1:15 Eastern, any weekday, unless it's a Jewish holiday, you can come and have a little teaching, have a community that is quote-unquote community, like a pop-up, a community for that day, for a shared purpose, and say Mourner's Kaddish. And for some people, if you're, if you need to say or want to say Kaddish for somebody, you don't have a place to do that otherwise, this has become a real community for that. So it's been super successful, whatever that means. What I mean by that is, yes, numbers, but also feedback, how meaningful this is for people. But yeah.
Well, I love this example, and I want to can we piece it apart a little? Because
Yeah.
I imagine there's a lot of, right, we could have a Zoom room every day, right? People show up, people leave, some people come back, some people, right? Maybe for some people it wasn't a community.
Yeah.
But I'm curious what it feels like. What's the there that right? You're like,
Yeah.
This is no longer just a group of people whose faces are on a screen. This feels like a community. Is like.
Great question, such a great question. I think, there's a through line through all the different, no 2 days are alike because it's different people, and there's no commitment other, than if a person wants to, they come. However, the facilitator, my colleague and friend, Rabbi Margolius, there's a person who anchors, who creates welcome each and every time for whoever is there, and states at the beginning, at the outset, what the purpose and what the protocol, this is what we're going to do today. And the second thing is, I don't know how to push into a definition of this because it's subjective, but there's a sense of safety to be vulnerable with experience if a person chooses to, or that if something arises, it's okay to have that. But I also want to say, what's come out this year as a something to experiment with, and it's apropos your earlier comment, we've started to have affinity group monthly sits. So for somebody like I host every month a LGBTQ plus mindfulness sit. 2 friends and colleagues who are Jews of color host a JOC affinity group mindfulness sit. And the feeling of community there, each time different, each time still pop up, but there's a shared purpose within a larger, loosely defined, space. There's a particular too.
It really sounds like it's very values driven as well, which is something we think a lot about at the Blue Dove Foundation, is how do we let our values, whether that's our organization values, our Jewish values, which I would just say are human values, how do we let that drive us and be that connecting piece? And when that, as you were sharing, Myriam, that kept coming up for me is sharing a burden with one's friend, nosei be'olim chavero, and what does that really look like in practice? And it seems like you're finding that practice there, which there's that word again. But what is it? What are the values that we need when creating a community, right? Because I think what differentiates a J space from perhaps another community style space is that it's grounded in some sort of value. I think that's my favorite part about working in the Jewish community, is it is value and mission driven. And how do we really lean into that to help us build meaningful communities, whatever that definition might be, whether it's the building, the space, the small groups, the big groups.
There's something Myriam said about with a special sauce for that group when you were answering the question, and it was about the way that the facilitator led. And it made me think about leadership and how building community is a totally different leadership. It's a different type of leadership skill, and it's something that I encourage us all to think about. It's not frontal leadership. It's not egotistical leadership. It is really about empowering others, and that takes a different skill set than some of us might be used to. You don't get to stand in front all the time. I imagine that he, special
He, him pronouns.
talent was elevating other voices in that space and not taking up so much space himself. And that is for some of us, an uncomfortable kind of leadership. My son is a sophomore in college, and he started a club on campus. And he brings in speakers. And at one of the programs, I asked him, did you introduce the speaker? And he said, no, somebody else did. And I said, perfect. That is how you run a club. You lead from your heart, you lead from behind, you lead by creating structures for others to shine. I made that up. That was my little mantra I shared with him.
Sounded great. I think there's also something when you were talking about this should be a values-driven space, and I'm sure we can all speak to this, but what is the point of having Jewish values in the work that all of us do? Why do we need to be mindful Jews? Why couldn't we just do mindfulness? Why do we have to feel like we belong? Why do we need Jewish relationships, right? Like, what is Jewish about mental health? I don't know. I'm curious, like, what we feel like all of our through line is.
I love the question, what is Jewish about mental health? Because I think of it like this, you know, our texts, our values, our traditions, our holidays, the core of it is about interpretation, is about picking it apart, discussing it, disagreeing, hearing somebody else's opinion, and I love that. And so I think the beauty is that we can take these sort of core values we have and make them meaningful for our community, because what works for one community does not have to be the same of what works for another community. I think that's the reality of the world we live in, and we should honor that. And once we start to see what it is we're looking for, right? Once you start to look for mental health in our text, it's like when you get a new car and then you just like can't stop seeing that car on the highway. It's like everywhere you go. Once you start looking for those connections to the things that ground us in that Judaism, you see them everywhere, and it's open for conversation. It opens the door to talk to somebody, to have a conversation and say, is this what you think? Is this how you feel? And I can't remember when we were talking about it, but what does that really look like for somebody to have that ownership and to really start to be a part of that space? And I think it's in the way that we embed those values, and I think sometimes just even the embedding the values takes something from just purely transactional to being very spiritual, emotional, whatever it might be, it sort of elevates it.
I think what I would say is that we look at our history and our ancient texts not to learn about the ancient world, but to be able to bring them forward into modernity. So as we're looking at a JCC, we are grounded in this ancient learning, and it's our challenge and opportunity, and I hope great joy, to be able to take that ancient learning and bring it out to our community to help them connect to it, or out to them so that we can connect to them through the through line of the story of our people. And that if we do that and we learn of it in an authentic way, where we're open to interpretation, where we're open to new ideas, where we're open to adding new voices to the conversation and reinterpreting it, then I think we will find great future success. Because ultimately, we reread things year after year, not because those words change, but we change. And how we therefore interpret them and present them through anything and everything that we do is the authentic way in which we want to build and sustain and grow the Jewish people. And I think if we do that and do that well, and we do that in proud partnership with our friends from the broader community, which is not an insignificant advantage of the platform that we all have the gift to work on behalf.
I want to say yes, yes, and on one level, there's nothing. Because it's universal, it's human connection, human hearts, and human bodies, minds, and souls. And practice what shapes us over time as we practice with shared vocabulary or understandings of those narratives, like the narratives and the subtexts and the space between and the subversions of the text, all of that around Jewish stories and rituals helps to create, I think, a vocabulary that's like a vernacular. I mean, that's the way I see it, that it can be a portal. Jewish can be one portal, and that's can define it in multiple ways, right? That no one monolith, but having, like, let's say, for example, a word that struck me when I first heard it, neshama, soul, or neshima, different vowels to that same word, help to, I feel something inside of me I identify as soul. And here's a Hebrew ancient language for it, and so I could plug in some way. So I don't think it's the only, but it gives a depth of potential.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. These are universal concepts, and Judaism offers some really wonderful pathways in. The minyan, the number of people who are required in observant circles to have prayer. Shiva, which is the way we surround and embrace a family in mourning or a person in mourning with community. Like, it's embedded in so many aspects of our culture and our teachings. And JCCs are such an important laboratory for bringing those kinds of, organizing principles out to the world as a gift and learning back from them, because, your JCCs are full of people who aren't Jewish, and many people in this room aren't themselves identified themselves as Jewish. And it's just a great way of exploring belonging based on a tradition, but also for people from all different backgrounds. So you really have an opportunity that most other Jewish institutions don't really have in the same way. And it's really like you're kind of on the leading edge, the cutting edge of bringing Jewish thought and Jewish beliefs out to the world and adding to the mix of what our world could be.
So I want to turn to ourselves for a minute. We all in this room work on behalf of the Jewish community. And at times, that means that fully living our own Jewish lives may be challenging because we're always on. So we had been talking about this during the break and the action, so I'd like to bring that out to all of you.
Yeah, I don't feel a part of Jewish community. That's crazy. But it is on my goals for this year. And I feel like I know what it is like to be in a group that is not a friendship, right? It's a little something more. Sometimes I'm like, you don't have to like everybody in a community. Hopefully you like everyone in a friend group, right? Like that might be the bit of the barometer. And yeah, before the pandemic, I had an incredible community that grounded me and that we were able to be together. And like, I imagine many of the people in this room or the people that you are serving, that was decimated in COVID. And so now I am building back, and it's really hard. And I tell people all the time about like going to different events and connecting with people, and I'm like, I really gotta go to that Shabbat dinner. Really gotta do it, gotta meet new people. Right? And so living out what we talk about, and I don't have, anybody here have like answers to that, but just we're not often left space for that. And so I don't know what it looks like to have integrated, communal identities with, I think we need separation between work and our lives. And yet, right, going back to bringing our full selves, if we're going to give so much of our emotional energy to our places of work, what are the implications of that?
It makes me think about, because I too do not think I'm very engaged in Jewish communal life, although I'm very Jewish. And what I always think about is when I enter a space, I always feel like I'm on. I feel like I'm, always representing my organization or my community. and always looking for the opportunity to be a connector to make sure somebody might get what they're looking for, what they need. And I often wonder what it might look or feel like for myself if I gave myself the permission to turn that off and be present as an individual. I think that it's hard. I think it's challenging.
Can I ask about that? 'Cause
Sure.
I almost wonder, right, like, are we doing a little less of what, right, is that bringing the transactional into, right, our presence when, and I feel that too, where I walk in, I'm like, I'm Jackie from Gather, I have to, right, but maybe we're not doing what we preach. I don't know.
It's like I oftentimes don't think I'm practicing a lot of self-care, and that's literally what I'm going to be talking about in any of my smaller sessions. So you can help me. But I think it really is like, what does that look like to care for ourselves, to make sure that we are getting what we need in the same way that perhaps we're carving out time to make healthy food, to nourish our bodies? How are we carving out time to make sure that whatever community that we want to be a part of, engaged with, that we have the time to be engaged with that? What's the thing that fills our metaphorical cup so that we have enough water then to pour it into somebody else's when they need it? I don't have an answer either, though.
And also, how do we have the systems at work to do that, right? If I'm working all my evenings and, right, I need to go to a doctor's appointment, I need to have therapy, right? Like, everybody at Gather knows exactly when each other's therapy is, and that is sacred time, and the 30 minutes after, please.
I love that.
Thursdays at 11.
We were actually, Myriam and I were talking about the status of being a Jewish communal professional makes it hard to be of the community if you choose to. And so I think I hear some of that coming out. Like when you walk in the room, you're Jackie from Gather, and you just want to be Jackie sometimes, right? And there's a status issue that goes on among Jewish professionals. And like I worked at the Federation for 9 years, at our Federation for 9 years. We stopped using the word staff. We wouldn't call ourselves staff because there's something so subservient about staff and the way often we were treated by lay leaders. I mean, I think we're all professionals here and we can be honest about these things, but the Jewish population, I'm not going to call them a community, has old habits of treating us like we're there to serve them. And that is not okay. It's just not okay. And if there are ways that we can change that dynamic and turn us into partners who have given our blood, sweat, and tears to the organizations that we're part of, the people, like we're not in this for the money, people.
But we could be. Let's pay each other.
We should be. We should be. We should be paid more. We should be appreciated. We should be valued, raised up, elevated, and treated like we're doing really great things in partnership with people who aren't being paid. So I'm throwing that out there as a way that some of us feel othered in our larger community.
So I'm sitting here debating whether or not to share what I'm about to share, but I'm going to share it. And there's one colleague in the room who I'm not going to call you out, Lori. But I will say that I met this wonderful person who's become a friend, a colleague, a spiritual buddy, because Lori Matzkin participated in something that I've had a real blessing, that's a real blessing in my life to have done for the past 20 years as a rabbi at IJS. We facilitate 18-month clergy cohorts, and in these cohorts, rabbis, cantors come and often come with a sense of, I don't have anywhere I actually can pray. Like, I may want to pray on Shabbat, but I'm busy, doing all the things a rabbi or a cantor might do. And I think that I have seen, so I don't know what the corollary might be in all of our different contexts, but I want to say there's a shared humanity in this too, from the clergy perspective of clergy wanting to just be human beings who are dedicated or doing whatever it is that they're doing they care about, but also to be able to be vulnerable. I come back to that word. And in a shared human experience, touch meaning. And I'll give you just one example. This was already like, about 15 years ago, but there's a cantor, as long as I can remember anything, which is not a given, but as long as I have memory, I think I'll remember this. This cantor, we were sitting one-on-one, talking, and he said, for the first time in his life, he felt like he could, and there's nothing creepy about this, he could, at least in my experience there wasn't, he could loosen his tie and undo his belt because he didn't have to suck his diaphragm in order to prepare to perform and cantorially, And I think that the shifting of these clergy who have chosen these to participate systemically, speaking systemically again, in organized Jewish life, to kind of get a distance from that, and also to invite participation from all of us as empowered to create our Jewish communities of meaning and practice, it's really important. Because it's like liberation doesn't happen from one perspective, from one angle alone. It takes a village. I know it sounds trite, but I guess the thing that I'd like to the importance of having spaces where we can step back from the roles we play and engage in being real together.
And we've talked a lot about authenticity here today, and I just, one of the things that I believe that we want to make sure that everyone does is has one thing to take away from a conference, at the very least, and we'll hope that you'll have a whole handful. But I think the last couple of minutes, I just want to step outside of the fishbowl for a moment and say, one of the things that I think we have sussed out here is the importance to bring your whole and authentic and full self to the work that we do. And the way in which we can do that is by making sure that we are also taking care of our whole authentic and full self. So in Myriam's example of rabbis and cantors needing to go pray somewhere where they could just pray, or we want to go work out in a place where we don't hear that the temperature of this is not that, and so, so that happens with you too. Or whatever it is that we want to do, or if we just want to study, or if we want to go to a class that we happen to be offering, that we can, from time to time, step into those places and just be ourselves to get the value that those around us are getting. So if there's one thing that you can take, this is a piece. Be your full and authentic self and present, and make sure that you're also taking care of your full and authentic self, whatever that may mean for you.
I think there's so much power in that as well, from the perspective of role modeling, right? Both for the people you're working with, that if you're going to take care of yourselves, you need to see the people around you doing it too, but also for your community. Going back to that word vulnerable, Myriam, there's nothing, I think, more empowering than seeing somebody be vulnerable and give you the permission to be vulnerable in that same way. And it's tough. It's not easy, I think, being honest and open about what you need, and it can feel very scary. And so I think making sure you have those strong relationships established, right? Coming back to creating meaningful relationships so that you can be your authentic self and you can role model that. And I think that is like a team effort, right? Everybody at your organization should be role modeling that. And again, being able to know that when you share, you're going to be heard, and being confident that you can receive that when somebody is sharing with you what they need.
And I think this all around flips the script back on that idea of a transactional model, right? I think, some of us who have been into spaces where we're trying to learn more about social justice and to push our communities forward in inclusion, diversity, equity, we've heard, right, patriarchy hurts men just as much as it hurts women. White supremacy hurts white people just as much as it hurts people of color, right? This transactional work that when we, right, work with people transactionally, that's when, as Wendy was saying, sometimes, right, they think of us as staff, right? When we're creating that backwards dynamic, if we flip that script, that can help us all as well. And I think also, Rabbi Myriam, what you were saying about what is this space for rabbis to pray, and where, right, actually goes back, it reminded me of what Wendy was saying about new types of leader, and how are we sharing power, and how does that show up? And I think that we have incredible leaders that we see at the front of the room, but also, right, how can we decenter power, right? There's limited power over, and there is infinite power with, right? And I don't always know the answer to try to share power with, but I think, right, because that will make it, then rabbis get to be their whole selves, right? And that's gonna make them better people and better rabbis, but we also have to treat them as full humans.
So we've got about 13 minutes left. So I'm going to put you back in groups, but I'm going to need you to come back when I say it's time to come back. So I'm taking the chance of releasing you for a few minutes as we're getting towards the end. But here we sit, and I think Jackie said before, do we all feel, are we a community here amongst ourselves? And I think at some level we would say, oh, we're a community of professionals and we're this and we're that. It's up to us to feel as if we belong. So we are here, we've come together in this temporary couple of days. What is it going to take, reflecting on what you've heard up here to this point, for you to feel, and what are you going to bring to this experience to make sure that you're helping others who you do not yet know feel as if they belong, and what are you going to need to belong, and how are you going to go about this idea of building a relationship for the sake of that relationship, one-on-one with new people that you meet. So,
Can I say, you said something really quickly, and I want to make sure that we heard it, right? What are you going to do for other people, and what do you need to feel like you belong to? I just wanted to make sure we...
So thank you, yes. That's why we all work together. So you guys have literally 3 minutes, and I'm going to use my big outdoor voice into the microphone when you're done. So ready, set, go. Same kind of groups as before. So thank you all for participating in that so fully, and I hope that you were all able to hear each other in terms of what you need, and we will work to make that so over the remainder of our time together. What we're going to do as we start coming in for a landing before I do the remaining housekeeping is I'm just going to invite anyone up here if they'd like to make any closing comment or observation about our conversation. And Carly, I'm going to start with you.
That.
I thought you were inviting people from the audience, and so then when you're like, I'm going to start with Carly, I was like, whoa.
Yeah, we're going to go around all 180 of
No comment.
I think what has been really powerful for me during this conversation is an opportunity to define terms, but then also know that those definitions are fluid, and that we've kind of defined them and then broadened them and narrowed them. And I think that is the type of learning and practice that has to take place in order to make our community, our population, our group, whatever it might be, a place where people really can belong.
I think that it didn't fully come together why these 4 people were asked to be in conversation together for me until we really got it. There was like a flow going. And so I think it's just been so fascinating to hear each other's different perspective. And I'd just like to thank, I learned from all of you. So thank you so much.
Okay, so I was just thinking about how when we show up, one of the things I want to encourage everyone to think about is showing up imperfectly, and being fully yourself means screwing up sometimes and failing sometimes, and we need to expand our culture to embrace that as learning opportunities. We don't always do it right. Diversity, equity, inclusion work is hard work, and if we hang back because we're afraid we're going to do it wrong or say the wrong thing, we're never going to get anywhere. So here's to screwing up, making mistakes, and not letting them define us, but using them as an opportunity to learn. And for those of us who lead JCCs, to creating cultures that embrace screwing up as a way of growing and learning, and take that into yourselves. Be a growth mindset.
Anybody familiar with creative inquiry as a practice? Yet another practice? So creative inquiry is what I feel like we've been doing right here. And I think that is a value in and of itself and an end in itself. And I feel like I also, like, who are we? We didn't know each other like very long, for like, except for just very recently and like to the minute. And, but I feel like I also feel we've begun to create real bonds and real threads of connection. And creative inquiry is a way in, So we don't have to know in advance. We don't have to know in advance. We can screw up and we can also not know.
So we're going to end where we began. Where we began was with this idea that for us to do our work well and to truly build what we call the town square, the community, you need to be in relationship with one another, feel as if you belong, listen to each other deeply and meaningfully, and take care of yourself and take care of one another. And hopefully, as we, what's that? Hopefully, we will all begin to own this. We're going to enter a funnel right now. We've had this very large, frontal, somewhat moderately interactive opportunity to be together. We are going to, when we're done, which we're not yet, we are going to break into 4 groups. And I'll remind you how that happens in a moment. And you're going to be able to dive a little deeper in a specific way with one of our 4 presenters here. And then tomorrow, some of you will have in smaller groups an opportunity to go a little deeper than that. And that's what I mean, there's a funnel. And each time you move a little bit further down the funnel, you're going to get a little bit more out of it. And then when you go back to your JCCs, we're going to start that process tomorrow. We're going to have time here to start unpacking everything that we've talked about so that we don't get back and say, I can't think about the conference, I've got all this email and voicemail. We really want you to, with intentionality, be able to bring it home. So before I do the housekeeping, which will allow us to get the ice cream, I'd like to invite Lori just for a second.
I'll amplify Myriam's microphone. Hi. I just wanted to say, because we're all leaders, we don't really have the participant perspective here. So as a participant in these IJS clergy retreats, what's so incredible and what blew me away at my first one was the staff symbiotically working together to present this unified energy. So whether it's yoga or prayer or a text study or a walk or whatever we're doing, there's a sense of this river flowing through everything with complete non-competition. So there's never a feeling of, come on my walk, it's going to be better than the yoga. And so I think maybe as JCCs, we can learn from that within our departments, that if we can create more of that webbing and that whole, that we're not competing for customers, that we're not competing to be the coolest department, we can actually hold that space in a really unified way. And that's, for me, where the trust and the revolution of IJS has been. So thanks, Myriam.
So here's the story, very simple. We are going to have a break from 2:45 till 3:30. We're going to go out where we had lunch, and there will be ice cream. You should eat the ice cream. Otherwise, it will melt because it's Tucson and it's hot. At 3:30, you need to please be in your rooms. If you have a green dot, you are going to go to the Javelina room, and you're going to be with Wendy. If you have a Blue dot, you are going to the quail room and you're going to be with Myriam. If you have a red dot, you're going to go to the coyote room and you're going to be with Jackie. Those 3 rooms are actually all in here, and while we're having ice cream, this will become 3 different spaces. If you have a yellow dot, you are going to go to the Swara room. If you have a yellow dot, listen carefully. You're going to go back through the lobby, out the back of the lobby, follow along the restaurant, and take a right. There are signs there, but you're going to go to the Swara room. I will help you along the way. We're going to be in that session from 3:30 until 5. From 5 to 6, you have a break. At 6 o'clock, where do you need to be? Because we're going to do what? And we're going to eat again.
And when do we want it?
All right, so folks, thank you for a great start. Go enjoy some ice cream, and we'll see you later.